Every time the community gathers in this place, we begin the same way. We light the Christ candle. And every time we gather, that represents for us the presence of one who brings light into our midst. We also light it because, at a time like this, because we realize that it's not just one who brings light into our midst, but by the grace of God, light comes into our midst through each soul among us. And today in particular, we light this in gratitude for the light that has come into our midst through David. Welcome to Highlands United Church. My name is Will Sparks, and I'm one of the people that serves in this community as a minister. And it's just a real honor to be able to host this particular gathering to celebrate and give thanks for the life of David Blair, and to join with Colleen and Devin and Liam, with David's whole family and wide circle of friends, to go through this time with you. We are so richly blessed with community and support that gets us through, aren't we? We are blessed to be able to gather on these lands held sacred for millennia and unceded by the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. May we live in reconciliation. And in this moment, we pause and take a breath because we realize the incredible gift of life. It's at times like this that we realize the incredible gifts of life in a more poignant way, and a sacred gift given to each of us. We get to live even through grief. David got to live it in all of its trouble and beauty. And today we bear witness to that gift. So let us remember well. Let us give thanks with whole and open hearts. Let us weep and laugh, because both are signs that we are truly awake to the gift of life. Let us lean into the mystery, trusting that God's steadfast love endures forever. Let us pray. Holy love at the heart of life, in whom the world took shape and we are born and we live our lives and we die. We can see your handiwork in all of it, all around us in the fabric of the creation and in the fabric of the lives we're living, in their seasons and cycles, ebb and flow. And in this moment, we open to your presence in our grief at the loss of David. Heal our wounded hearts. Come to us with the grace of forgiveness. Calm us as we stand on the brink of the great mystery of life and death. Speak your word of hope and grace and love as we celebrate the immeasurable gift of David's life. Bring us into your presence, that we might find strength here together. Amen.
Sing our opening hymn.
Say that the Lord
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Chambers, and I served in ministry with Colleen Blair for about 13 years, and our families have been intertwined for about 25 years. When we came here, Devin and Liam were just spry young fellows, and now they're spry, not as young fellows. But remarkable nevertheless. The scripture reading chosen for today is one that was read at Colleen and David's wedding about 40 years ago. 1 Corinthians 13, selected verses. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. If I give away all of my possessions, and if I hand over my body that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but it rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part. Then I will know fully, even as I am fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love. Amen. In this service of remembrance and celebration, there are individuals, family members, and dear friends who will come forward to offer a few words. And we know on an occasion like this, there's never enough that can be said, and yet whatever is said somehow is enough. It's absolutely enough. And so I would like to invite Carol and Fiona and Ken to come forward, please, and to speak on behalf of the family, sharing your memories about David. Come on up.
This guy doesn't know I'm the chatty one.
Uh-oh. Buckle in.
Anyway, my name is Carol. I'm David's younger sister. I want to just give a little bit of words from my other brother, Alan, in honor of David. And so, his older brother, Alan, also cherishes the memories of his kid brother and admired the way he inspired so many others as he tackled life challenges with such courage. Thank you, Alan. So, my big brother, David. After contracting polio at the ripe old age of 2.5, David spent many years in and out of hospital having operations and rehab. He developed an amazing perspective on the world around him. Our mom had told him that he was neither disabled nor crippled. He just had extra challenges to overcome, and overcome them he did. He started his mobility journey with a homemade bogey. I think here you might refer to it as a soapbox. Basically a piece of wood with wheels and a rope attached to the front to steer. He used his arms and hands for power, and he was then able to keep up with the neighborhood kids and join in their play. Now he needed legs. Enter his little sister, Carol. David would hit the ball at the local team games, and Carol would run the bases to score, always with David's chant, "Faster, Carol, faster," ringing in her ears. This was a true sibling bonding experience. We made quite a team. A whole new world opened for David, though, when he was given his first blue car. This was an innovative three-wheeled petrol vehicle with hand controls built for one. I think it's gasoline here, but so unfortunately, these vehicles were very unsteady, especially on the corners. So David inevitably found himself and his car on its side in the middle of the road. No problem. David would just wait for one passerby, and they would easily flip his car upright again, and away he would go. In 1964, David was 20 and off to new beginnings in Canada. First things first, go to night school and improve his accounting skills, find a job, and buy a car with hand controls. Also around that time, David began participating in the many sports he learned and enjoyed: archery, dartchery, wheelchair racing, volleyball, basketball, table tennis, and kayaking, just to name a few. He was also a very active volunteer and was instrumental in supporting the BC Paraplegic and Wheelchair Sports Associations. But not enough. David wanted to go saltwater fishing with his work buddies and lake fishing with his family. His answer: buy a boat. He learned how to refinish and maintain the boat, tow it behind his car in a trailer, and he was set. Many a successful fishing trip ensued, even if no fish were caught. The next logical step, you would think, would be for David to learn how to fly. Unfortunately, this did not come to pass, although he did go parasailing with me in Kelowna. I would like to think today of David flying above us and saying, "You go, guys. Learn, love, appreciate, stay true to yourself, and follow your dreams." David, you were an inspiration to all who knew you and very, very much loved. Thank you.
And Fiona.
I left my Kleenex over there, so I can't cry. Remembering David. Can you hear me okay? This memory of David takes me back to 1970. The British Commonwealth Games were held in July of that year in Edinburgh, Scotland. Following the regular games, there were games for wheelchair athletes, and David decided to participate. For some reason, Canada chose not to cover the costs of wheelchair athletes, but he went anyway. My ex and I happened to be traveling in Europe at that time, so we went over to Edinburgh to watch David perform. We were there for the opening ceremonies and watched each country come one by one into the stadium. When it came to Canada's turn, there was David in his wheelchair, proudly holding the Canadian flag with no one behind him. He was the only Canadian participant. This speaks to the strength of his character and his unwillingness to accept injustice in any form. If memory serves, which it doesn't really, but we watched him participate in track events, table tennis, archery, and basketball. As usual, he gave it his all. David hasn't gone away. He walks beside us every day, unseen, unheard, but always near, still loved, still missed, and always dear.
And Ken.
My father, Colin Blair, asked me to share some of his memories with his time spent with his brother David, camping, fishing, and canoeing. David had a wonderful relationship with our Uncle Shorty, who introduced David to Wells Gray Park. For 5 or 6 years in a row, David organized a trip to the park with my brother Nair and Ian and the Whiteman boys. David brought his power boat and carried supplies to the far end of the Azure Lake, where we set up camp every year. Fishing was a daily activity, and we routinely caught our limit, giving some away to tourists. David would take our fellow campmates in his boat and was happy to share the premier fishing spot they had discovered. They were amazing trips. Canoeing around the 116-kilometer Bowen Lake circuit was another highlight. David took the front seat in the canoe and relied on his strength to pull us forward. There was one harrowing moment as we approached the halfway point where the slow-moving water of the Isaac Lake funnels into the fast-flowing narrows, and the path forward looked impassable. But David planted his paddle in the water with strength and precision, and turned the canoe into the once obscured escape route. The relief was short-lived as we pounded through wave after wave and were soon soaked from head to toe, but navigated to a back eddy where we were able to appreciate the thrill of it. This thrill was soon replaced with dread for the task ahead. The portage at the end of Isaac River was a ruthless mile-long slog around roots and rocks and a hike over a ridge. As always, David was undeterred and hauled himself down the trail and over the ridge on his crutches, yet another example of his indomitable spirit. From fishing to raging rapids to portages, David was unstoppable. As I reflect now on the life of my brother, I am full of gratitude for the adventures we shared and admiration for the man he was and the life he led. David inspired me and set an example for so many others that will undoubtedly endure for generations. We will miss him. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Yes, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Carol. Thank you all. And Jerry Brewer, I invite you to come forward, please. Former colleague and friend of David, Jerry Brewer.
My friend David, during my 90-plus years, I've met and learned to appreciate a considerable number of interesting people. David certainly was one of those. I first got to know David when he joined the city as a timekeeper at the works yard. Now, this lofty position had David sharing deck space with another great guy, Rick Brookshaw, from whom I will read a few words later on. The desk they shared was a beautiful piece of furniture, double-sided, so they had to get to know each other and even like each other. The desk was ultimately taken from them and put back into the mayor's office. This gave those two guys a very unique relationship with the mayor. Wonderful. Now, we should note that the timekeeper's job was rather complex. Doesn't sound like it, but it is. It required someone who would keep track of the 100 or so workers we had at the time, the hours they worked each day, the jobs they performed with those hours or within those hours, for the appropriate pay rate within the union collective agreement scale, and communicate with the workers in the various languages that the workforce at that time had. David's accent, slight as it was, made it even more interesting because between one and the other, sometimes they understood each other. Now, it wasn't long after when we watched how David performed this job that we realized that the right man had been hired. Now, during his time as timekeeper, if the city payroll department issued an incorrect check for one of the workers, David's methodology was fix it today, reissue the check. These guys deserve their pay today. Every 2 weeks, the payroll comes out. We're not waiting 2 weeks for that guy to get the day's pay that was missed. Guess what? It became a habit. Payroll corrections were made. David proceeded to make sure people were looked after. That was one of the strengths of David, to make sure people were looked after, not for himself, but for those other people. Now, the city policy at the time encouraged staff to consider working at a higher position within the organization. If you sought a higher position, you could apply to personnel, and if your request for this training and courses was in line with the long-term goal of staff placement in the future, you were likely to be approved for that training. It wasn't long after David learned of this that he applied to become an accountant. All he had to do once it was approved is pass all the courses. Easy? I think not. Achievable for David? Absolutely. Oh, by the way, during the same time period, David decided to pursue a whole series of sporting activities. So work, study, and participate in all these various sports. Not only participate, that wasn't enough. Excel in these sports. That's the objective. Now, please, and I know everyone knows this, but I always keep in mind that David overcame all of these challenges with the lingering effects of polio and met all of the challenges without complaint, charging forward all the time. In recognition of David's sporting accomplishments, he received the rare honor of the keys to the city. I don't know if he ever used the keys, but he got the keys. And that, I remind all of you, was a rare occasion. They didn't give the keys to everybody. I don't know today, I have no idea. Now, some of David's attributes we appreciated were his straightforward approach to life in general. The absolute certainty that David never lied about anything, socially convenient lies or any other type of lie. He didn't lie. If you asked David a question, you got the answer. You may not like it, but one thing was certain. He gave you the answer that was neither socially dodgy response, it was the answer. David's driving, however, at times caused some staff members to have a survival experience. David had hand controls on his vehicle, and when he took some staff members with him for a staff luncheon, the experience caused some of them to think, I'm not sure the lunch is worth the trip, but they persisted. Dave was an active participant in the retired city staff lunches, which have been held for the last 20 years or 25 years, much through the initiation of some of the friends that David had from his earlier work years, guys like Roy Jones, Steve, and so forth. I'm confident that many others will talk about David's willingness to contribute to the community through his activities in nonprofit societies and boards. But to me, it's noteworthy again of David's willingness to contribute, to give back, not to get, but to give. By the way, as some of you now know from the brochure, David retired as one of the city accountants. He achieved that as well. Now, David's friends often commented on how successfully he dealt with the increasing challenges with shared determination and good humor. Now, as some of you may know, I can talk forever. I think it's best if I conclude with this comment. David, you gave us a perfect example of how important it is to overcome our challenges and how to stay strong right to the finish of the race. Rest well, David, my friend. Now I'm going to read you a piece sent by Rick Brookshaw, his table mate at City Hall Yard. 2 quick stories. I met David when I started working with the city on March 10, 1969. Some of you weren't even around, could think that far back. We not only shared office space at the works yard, but also shared this double-sided desk. What better way to become good friends? Lots of things to reminisce about, but here are just 2. David and I and about 10 others, mostly from the city, flew to Reno one particular trip. On the second evening, David said he was going downstairs to the casino as he had figured out how to win at blackjack. Rick's words. Rick said, I met up with him about 40 minutes later at the blackjack table. I asked him how he had made out. As I walked to him, he immediately picked up a glass of straight scotch, hammered it back, turned at me and looked and said, "Shut up." Another adventure was when we invested in a duplex in Powell River. There were 6 of us. David was the accountant, the investment brains. I was the procurement guy. Martin, Ozzie, Roy, and Steve were the construction and the maintenance team. Well, the Powell River pulp mill never did expand. So after about 2 years of subsidizing this house, we dumped it. As years would go by, I would periodically ask David if he has heard any news of the big expansion at Powell River Pulp. He looked right at me and said, "Shut up." Rick says, I cannot describe what an incredible friend he was, and I will sadly miss him for the rest of my lifetime. Rick, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerry, Paul. Thank you, Jerry, for your words and for carrying the words of Rick as well. Paul Mockler is a longtime friend of David.
Thanks, Dan. I too need glasses. We first met Colleen and David in 1986 in a prenatal class. That was the year of Expo 86, I'm sure you'll remember. We were both expecting our first children. Colleen was pregnant with Devon, and Margaret with our daughter Andrea. Little did we know that what began then was a lasting friendship, now in its 39th year. We were particularly close when we had our young families. I think part of the attraction for each other was this sense that we had both entered a new chapter in our lives and that we got comfort learning to navigate the challenge of parenthood together. Liam and then our Lauren were added to the mix in subsequent years. Our family has many warm memories of the activities we shared together. Camping at Porpoise Bay, in Hope, night skiing at Grouse, birthday celebrations, numerous concerts, and Christmas pageants at St. David's, just to name a few. But it was more than shared activities. It ran deeper than that. We took a genuine interest in each other's children. Both of our girls will tell you that Colleen and David were instrumental in helping them develop their self-confidence at a very young age, knowing that there were people outside our immediate family that loved them, cared for them, and supported them. Of course, we are here to celebrate the life of David, and what a remarkable life it has been. I have just a few short thoughts to share with you about David. On a humorous note, I will always remember that if you engaged David in a conversation about something he was really interested in, like politics, for example, David could become quite animated and excited. The more excited he got, the faster he spoke, and at times at a rate that defied comprehension by a normal human being. One night after witnessing this, Andrea turned to me in the car and asked if Mr. Blair was speaking Scottish. You have already heard about David's ability to overcome the adversity that resulted from his polio. I have often reflected on that courage, strength, and determination. Throughout our lives, we all have faced times when we felt we were being challenged to our limits. I know that there were times when I felt a little overwhelmed, trying to balance the responsibilities of parenting, being involved in our children's lives, getting them to school, driving them to lessons and sports, helping to coach or manage their teams, maintaining a home, all the while keeping up with the demands of work. On such occasions, I took inspiration from David, knowing that he faced the very same challenges, but layered on top of those for him was a set of legs that had made it very difficult just to walk. And yet he seemed to be managing just fine. Not only that, David often found a way to help others. One year I was planning to replace a fence. David offered to help. Relying largely on the strength in his arms, he was able to maneuver around, do the measuring, and even help put the boards in place. Somehow, together, we got the fence built. In recent years, our interactions have been limited to periodic walks on the seawall or in his neighborhood, or just sitting together in the living room or the backyard. Always the reward for such a visit was a cold beer. I remember these visits with David, partly, I suppose, because I felt that we thought alike on many issues. David was smart, a good visitor, a good listener, and not judgmental. Upon leaving these visits with a dear friend, I always felt better than when I had arrived. Colleen, Devin, and Liam, understandably, this is a very difficult time for you. We will all try over the coming weeks to help you cope with your loss. Perhaps with time, though, there will be some solace knowing that your husband and father lived his life to the fullest, always with a generous spirit, and in a way that was inspiring to all who knew him.
Thank you so much, Paul. And Devin is going to be speaking on behalf of the immediate family. Do you need some water? No, you're good.
Dad had so much to be proud of in his life before getting married, but he wasn't one to live in the past. Earlier in his life, he was told he wouldn't live past the age of 40, but clearly he had other plans. At 40, Mom and Dad were married, and Liam and I came shortly after. Without ever needing words, we witnessed every day the meaning of courage, loyalty, perseverance, humility, and love. Together, we traveled the world, camped with family and friends, connected over sports and games, and we laughed. Dad had a sharp sense of humor and a dry wit that would send us into hysterics. He was always looking for an opportunity for a joke and a laugh up until the end. Dad lived with regular episodes of pain due to his polio, but he kept that very much hidden and in perspective. He would tell himself the pain on that day was not as bad as the pain it wasn't as bad as the pain he had experienced at other points in his life. He found cold weather particularly hard, but he never let his health interfere with his support for us, going to Liam's soccer games, rain or shine, or traveling to visit me abroad. Dad's selflessness was always on display when it came to being a father. Even in his last days, he would always ask us if we were hungry, if we needed anything, if we wanted to share his meal, always putting our needs before his. Dad was fiercely loyal and devoted to us, and his love had no bounds. We're more than grateful than words could convey to have had a lifetime with our dad, and that Mom and Dad shared over 40 years of love and life together. Dad was truly grateful for every chapter in his life and the friends, colleagues, and family who shared it with him, and we are grateful for him. For those of you joining from Scotland, Ireland, Australia, or other parts of Canada, and those present here today, you have been a part of the strongly woven tapestry of our lives, and we are deeply grateful for you. Thank you for celebrating Dad's life with us.
Thank you so much, Devin. Let's take a moment to allow these stories and these words shared to sink in as we listen to this musical interlude, Eric Say Love Lilt.
Sad am I without thee. When I'm lonely, dear white hart, black the night or wild the sea, by love's light my foot finds the old pathway to thee. Sad am I without thee. Thou'rt the music of my heart, harp of joy, O Critch McCree, moon of guidance by night, strength and light thou'rt to me. Ver me, O Rowan, ver me, O Rowan, ver me, sad am I without thee.
Thank you, Jordy. And thank you also for the hospitality of this community of faith. Will Sparks, one of the ministers here, and Melissa, and Joy, and Tanis, and Sheila, who helped, and the whole community who have offered your presence and your support at a time such as this. To know David was to know integrity. This is not a bad quality to find in a person who counts your money, who serves as treasurer and deals with the finances of a city or a nonprofit or a church. David had a sense of justice and moral rectitude. Straight as an arrow he shot from his bow as an Olympic archer. His friend and colleague at Raycam Community Center, Carol Brown, echoes this appreciation when she writes, "After David left the board, Raycam spiraled into debt. It was at this point I found myself elected board treasurer, In desperation, I reached out and asked David for help. Cash flow was an issue, and creditors a daily reality. Utilizing his financial skills and knowledge, David worked with me to devise a plan that new staff could implement to bring the organization back to stable footing. When unknown issues came up, I would call him frantic, and he would always take my numerous calls patiently, providing helpful, supportive advice. Soon the organization was back on sound footing. Carol also writes, of the 7 years David served as a treasurer of the board for Vancouver City, Raycam, and other nonprofits in Strathcona, where David not only guided financial stability, but also made a practical difference in the neighborhood, working with the city to, for example, to make sure that the garbage was picked up and the streets cleaned more regularly. Carol concludes, this was David's greatest contribution to community. He set up opportunities and led from behind. He helped residents learn and build confidence in their own ability to influence and impact conditions affecting their lives. And I am grateful to be lucky enough to have David as a friend I could trust, laugh, and conspire with. David, I will miss you, but take comfort in the memories and love you left behind. Thank you, Carol Brown. In the 25 years David and I have known each other, I don't think we've had one conversation about God, Jesus, or the Bible. As astonishing as it might seem, not once did we discuss soteriology, theodicy, or hermeneutics, which is likely how we remained friends. We did talk about the church a lot, especially when we were both at St. David's United, which he tried to convince me was named after him, but we knew it was Wales, not Scotland. And we talked about the church, especially when he served as treasurer, but St. David's was not the, but for David, not the saint, but for David Blair. Faith was not the books that he read or the things he talked about. David's faith was embodied in the goodness of his life. One of his go-to expressions was, "This is the point of the whole exercise." The quote attributed to St. Francis of Assisi seems fitting: "Preach the good news at all times. If necessary, use words." David might say, "This is the point of the whole exercise," because his life was his sermon. He didn't need to talk about it, and sometimes made fun of those of us who did. Last week, Janet and I exclaimed how beautiful we found a song that we had recently heard from the stage play Wicked. Not the movie, but the stage play. This song is going to come in part 2 of the film, if you've seen the part 1. The song, you might remember, is Changed for Good. And there in our kitchen, Janet commented, "That's true of David. To have known him is to have been changed for good." Which does not mean that he was a saint. He could have a ribald sense of humor. He delighted in teasing Colleen, Janet, or me, which I'm told is an expression of love, usually. Like any of us, David could be wrong and stubborn and impatient, and not often, but sometimes snobby. For example, don't ever try to pretend Irish whiskey is the same as a good single malt scotch. David was a tiny bit competitive, and when trying to teach Janet and me the card game whist, he couldn't believe how thick-headed we seemed. But whether dealing with friends who don't seem to be able to track whether or not the 9 of spades or the Queen of Hearts has already been played, or dealing with his own health challenges, David turned to humor to lighten a heavy moment. When I visited David in the hospital, I would often say, "Janet sends her love." And he would reply, "That's nice, but I prefer cash." Always the treasurer. And yet it's funny because there's no doubt that what David truly treasured was his family, his friends, the vibrancy of the natural environment, the communities of compassion. At the front end of the service, we read 1 Corinthians 13, often referred to as the love chapter. And as this was the reading at David and Colleen's wedding, it seemed fitting to Colleen that it also be read at David's memorial, where we celebrate his life and honor him, because after all, faith, hope, and love abide. Colleen observed that when two people get married, they have no idea really what they're getting into. You can't know in advance what the future will hold. And neither can you know what love will look like 10 or 20 or 30 or more years down the road naturally. And so on the threshold of marriage, you speak of love, and you promise love for better, for worse, and you step forward just with an armful of trust. Now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, but then we will know fully, even as we are fully known. Colleen said, at the end of life, with 40 years shared, you know the shape of love, how it has grown in you, what love has called forth from you, how it has taken root and how those roots deepen. After decades together, you see that the roots intertwine, and below ground, where one life begins and the other ends, is indistinguishable. Even at the end of a life, the root system remains. And perhaps this is why the author and poet John O'Donohue wrote this verse in his blessing for a loved one who has died. We look forward to each other no longer from the old distance of our names. Now you dwell inside the rhythm of breath, as close to us as we are to ourselves. It's not easy to distinguish where one life begins and another ends. Your roots intertwine, and now you dwell inside the rhythm of breath, as close to us as we are to ourselves. David was a remarkable man. As we give thanks for the gift it was to have known and shared life with David, we remember the shared breath, roots intertwined, abiding love. And so with eyes of gratitude and a heart of appreciation, let's turn now to a few images of his life, carefully curated by Devin and Liam, with Geordie accompanying with some beloved Scottish tunes, Ye Banks and Braes, and the Skyboat Song.